I'm if you don't mind me saying, a magnanimous man. I can be that way.
I thought you didn't vote that way.
What do you mean? No.
Wow.
No.
Oh, magnanimous.
Magnanimous.
Oh, gotcha. My bad.
So, Albert Breer, as we all know, is one of my favorite people, and his one major flaw, just a major flaw. It's in his DNA, though.
It definitely
He
is.
can't help himself. He can't help himself, even though, because I listened to him tell stories, most of his family did root for Michigan. A lot of his family root for Michigan.
Wow.
Yeah, and he just decides to actually, go to Ohio State and all that stuff. So the Ohio State wins the national championship, and I say to Albert, "You want to come on the show?" He's like, "Yep, sure." And I'm like, "Let's do it." And look who it is right here on the Rich Eisen Show, a national champion.
Hey.
Senior reporter for Sports Illustrated.
He made it home.
My third national title, for the record. I have
Albert
3 now.
Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Good to see you, Albert. How are you?
Good to see you, Rich. It's a good morning over here. It was a little. This was an interesting year, and we went through a lot. But
what do you mean?
I'd like to
lot?
thank the Michigan. I'd like to thank the Michigan Wolverines. I'd like to thank the Michigan Wolverines for waking us up at the end of November. In the end, things sort of work out, and
okay.
I actually did seek some counsel from an Alabama fan friend of mine who I believe there was a year where they lost to Auburn and lost the opportunity to go to the SEC title game and wound up winning the national title anyway. And I always thought it'd be the weirdest feeling in the world. And I'm not going to lie, it is a little weird. But he said you get over it. So I think he'll get over it.
I'm sure you get over it. All right, just real quick here. What's the stuff Ohio State went through this year? Like what is it, Albert?
Oh, like other than a really bad afternoon at the end of November?
Exactly. Really, the we went through it. The through it was as I was saying, the leopard-like face eating amongst all you folks that happened. So it wasn't everybody outside in. It was the circular firing squad, dude.
Hey! And credit to us for motivating the team.
But unreal though, dude. Unreal. Like I was saying,
it was awesome.
Will Howard looked like Phil Simms, man. That's what I was saying. Will Howard looked like Phil Simms, and Jeremiah Smith is arguably the best skilled player in college football, and he's barely out of diapers, and the running backs run with such fury, violence. They really do. And then obviously the defense stepping up big. Congrats, brother.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. In a serious moment here, I did think, you obviously, I'm sure it was the same for you, Rich, but you think about a lot of things when you win. And one of the things I thought about was, I was at my son's hockey tournament in Lake Placid last year, about a year ago. And, I personally was having a tough day. And that was when we got the news at Sports Illustrated that everybody was being laid off. And I remember how horrible that day was and having to hold it together for my family and not really, show the way I was kind of feeling inside. And just so people know, the stuff between me and Rich, and we've had so much fun with each other over the last decade. I will say that on that day, no one had my back outside of my own family like Rich Eisen had my back. And I really appreciate that. And I'm bringing that up because the other news that I got that day that cheered me up was Caleb Downs committed that night.
Yeah, man, that kid can thump it, and I'm like I said, I'm always appreciative of you, and I just wanted to have you on here to
I just thought that story, honestly though, you know how much I appreciate you, and
thanks, pal.
I thought that it was just kind of an interesting thing that I thought about because it was like when a lot of things could have gone wrong, it was Rich Eisen and Caleb Downs that cheered me up. So.
And we both can run downhill. One of us needs to run downhill, and the other one can figuratively and literally do it. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So let's jump in. Are the Cowboys going to hire Brian Schottenheimer? Albert, is this real right now?
I mean, I think they've certainly come to a comfort level with him, in a pretty prominent role on their coaching staff since moving on from Kellen Moore. I think that was 2 years ago now, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think Schotty's, like, if you've been around him, like, he's very energetic. He's got a great personality. You would not win the press conference by hiring Brian Schottenheimer as your head coach. That's for sure. But I think he's a little bit better at the job than people give him credit for. Now he's bounced around a lot, there's no question about that. And, there is that question, with his last name and everything else, why hasn't somebody hired him already if he's that good? It's a fair question to ask. But I think he's in the mix with a few other guys. Kellen Moore is in that mix. And, really, I think has some of the things that Jason Garrett had, and the connection to the Jones family. And, then there's Deion, which I know you wouldn't make this mistake, Rich, but I know a lot of people do make the mistake of thinking Deion's all flash when he's actually sort of an old school coach whose foundation is on fundamentals and toughness and all those great things. So, those are the names that kind of jump out off the list to me. And I think the one thing that you have to be a little worried about is this becoming a little too insular? You know what I mean? In other words, is Jerry just going with something he knows and trying to hit a double, or is he really trying to hit a home run here? Are the Cowboys too insular right now? Do they need a little bit of a shakeup? I think those are fair questions to ask based on what we've seen, just as far as the candidate list goes.
So Deion's out, like, or they told each other we're not going to do this, or what? Should we take this and waiting maybe potentially for Kellen Moore as the signs of that's who Jerry's going to hire here?
The Kellen Moore thing. So that obviously you got to slow play it a little bit on Kellen Moore because we see if the Eagles are going to win on Sunday, first of all, and then you can't even talk to him. You can't sit down and talk to him until after that. Now, the good news is they did get him in for a first interview. So if you don't do that, then you can't do the in-person interview. But, certainly, we would have some clarity on Kellen Moore next week. They can't hire him until the Eagles are eliminated. So if they win, that's obviously another wrench in this whole thing. But there are a lot of people in that building who've worked with Kellen Moore, who know Kellen Moore. They'd be able to set up an infrastructure for Kellen Moore. I think if they made the decision, say the Eagles win on Sunday and they fly to Philly and they do a formal interview with him on Monday and decide he's our guy, but obviously by rule they can't officially hire him for another 2 weeks because of all the background they have with him. They would be able to start to put together the infrastructure, for the Kellen Moore era in Dallas. And I think the other thing that's important here is the Joneses really love Moore. And the Joneses really saw Moore, again, the same way they saw Garrett, a guy who played quarterback for them, a guy who was, sort of quasi part of the coaching staff while he was still a player, a guy who was pushed up the ladder by them. In a lot of ways, I know I've used this term with you before, Rich, where, Jerry to some degree saw Jason as his creation. And I think that protected Jason for a while there. I think Jerry may look at Kellen the same way. And I think Kellen's really, really capable on top of that. So he's still the name that I have circled here as the one that that makes some sense. And, I know on top of everything else, Kellen's, obviously gone through some ups and downs over the last couple of years, which are to his benefit. And there are other teams that really liked him when they interviewed with him. Like the Panthers, for example, had planned to hire Frank Reich a couple of years ago, but Kellen Moore's interview kind of set them back a little bit where they had to rethink things a little. And they wind up going forward with Reich anyway. But Moore really hit it out of the park with them. So he's at least an interesting name to consider and, has a lot of built-in relationships that bolster his candidacy, not the least of which, of course, is his relationship with Dak Prescott.
What are you hearing out of Vegas, Albert?
Yeah, so I think Tom Brady's personal relationships are a factor here. One thing that I did hear was like not to rule out Pete Carroll or Steve Spagnuolo because Brady has respect for them having gone up against them, having played against them. Obviously, he's competed on a Super Bowl stage against each of those guys. Spagnuolo with the Giants way back when, and then obviously, against Pete Carroll in Super Bowl 49, I think it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. I also think that there's a connection on the GM side that could influence where they go with the coach. And there's a guy who's the assistant GM of the Buccaneers. His name's John Spytek. He was actually briefly a Michigan teammate of Brady's, but that's not really the foundation of their relationship. They spent a year together. Brady was the starting quarterback. Spytek was on the scout team. You remember, Rich, like the famous like Tuesday meetings that Brady would have with Belichick and later Nick Caserio,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they would sit down, they would go through the opponent chapter and verse, and here's what we're going to do going forward this week. Well, John Spytek was the one that ran those meetings for Brady in Tampa. And so for the 3 years that Brady was a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, every Tuesday he was sitting down, and John Spytek and a guy named Rob McCartney were doing the advanced scouting report for Tom. And so they were able to build a relationship there where I think it could be a factor for Spytek in potentially getting that job. And then if he gets that job, now do you open it up a little bit on the coaching side to see what he would want? So I'm not saying Spytek's got the job. I'm not saying Pete Carroll or Spagnuolo necessarily are going to get the coaching job either, but I think those relationships do matter.
Interesting. Okay. So keep I guess if you're talking Pete, that could be done now. And if you're talking Spags, you got to wait till he's done. Yep. So keep an eye on all of that. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Ben Johnson being introduced as we speak. Did he choose the Bears just as much as the Bears chose him? Yeah.
So this one's fascinating. I mean, we can start with the Raiders, like what the Raiders did with Ben, where at the very beginning, Ben wasn't going to take an interview with the Raiders. And Tom Brady actually called Ben's agent and sold him on the idea of it. They spent an hour on the phone, and that was when Ben accepted the interview request. He was really intrigued by Brady's vision. Mm-hmm. Brady saying that he was going to be involved and that he wasn't going to put anything that was an embarrassment to his name. Like he was really determined to change the face of the Raiders. There are these money people that are coming in. Egan Durbin, CEO of Silver Lake, has 7.5% of the team now. Big private equity guy. Tom Wagner is Tom's partner from the soccer team over in England. He's an investor too. So he really liked the idea of what Brady put in front of what Brady put in front of him. And then, with the Jaguars, I think that was a little bit like Shad wanted to go through his process, and that process was moving along, but maybe not pacing as fast as the others. And so, I think this goes back to a year ago. Like, I think 1 year ago, if the Bears' job was open and they had offered the job to Ben Johnson probably would have accepted it. It was my understanding at that time that was the job he wanted. Then in the year in between, I think both sides sort of recalibrated, where the Bears had kind of leaned towards we need a leader of men, more someone who's going to be able to coach all 53 and not just one. And Ben kind of looked inward at the Lions and said, I want something like this. So I want alignment between the general manager and the head coach, and I want an ownership group that's going to be willing to see its mistakes and fix them. And so that's where it kind of felt like, okay, is this a match, right? Does this really work? Mm-hmm. And I think the good thing about that is they went through the interview process kind of through that lens, both of them, and they came to the determination, not only can Ben Johnson coach the quarterback, but he also can be a leader of men in his own way. It's going to look different than Dan Campbell, but he's going to be a leader of men in his own way. And then on the flip side, Ben could look at it and say, yeah, I like Caleb Williams, but on top of that, I really, found common ground with Ryan Poles, who was sincere and real with Ben during the interview process. And I see an owner in George McCaskey who does look like he's prepared to look in the mirror and does look like he wants to fix things and does look like he's changing the organization. And so, I think in that way, it's sort of, I think it was good for both sides, going from where they would have had the marriage a year ago, maybe under in a different context, and now they've had the year kind of like where a lot of this stuff sort of came together for them. So I think it's kind of a cool backstory to the way the whole thing worked out, and now we get to see what it looks like with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams working together in Chicago.
Yeah, right. And Caleb's there. His cast in his hand had to do with the cyst, I guess. So there's nothing serious going on there, and off we go. I mean, like that's the marriage that we're going to see, and what a fascinating addition to the NFC North and subtraction within the NFC North. Right here, getting ready. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. A few minutes left. Let's get into championship weekend. Is Jalen Hurts hurt, Albert?
I think he's banged up, and I think, you know what? Like, it's interesting. I heard this theory from an executive with a team, right? Which was the one issue you have with the quarterbacks who are physical runners, who take on damage over the course of the year, is that it can kind of affect their mechanics and their timing a little bit late in the year, which might be why some of the guys who do run a lot or rely on their legs a lot struggle sometimes in the playoffs. It's like I just see that a little bit with Hurts, where it's like it doesn't look quite the same in the passing game for them. And then I think the Packers, with their first-year defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley, drew a little bit of a blueprint where it was make Hurts beat you from the pocket and cage rush him. And if that means giving him time, give him time, but force him to beat you from there. And, I think a lot of that is predicated on, being able to stop Saquon Barkley and get them into long yardage and try to get them playing from behind, which is a really, really hard thing to do because of how good the Eagles are across the board, how great that offensive line is. But that's been that's really the blueprint. And I think it's one that, Jeff Hafley and the Packers were able to draw effectively 2 weeks ago. And then last week, I think the Rams, to a large degree, executed it. You know what I mean? Like, and put themselves in a position, to win that game if they could stop Barkley, which obviously they couldn't. So yeah, I mean, I think the blueprint's out there, but I think it's one of those things that's a little bit easier said than done. You know what I mean? We'll see if the Commanders can pull it off. Okay,
and in the AFC Championship game. It's kind of crazy, dude, because when you were standing on the street corner in Washington, D.C., and I was on the set of Total Access in 2011 during the lockout, and, that's, by the way, coming up on 14 years ago, which is crazy.
Yeah.
If we had said, will we ever see a matchup like Manning and Brady in the playoffs again, right? Yeah. With these young quarterbacks coming in, who are they going to be? We have no idea who they're going to be. The answer would be probably not. Well, this is the fourth matchup between Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, as many as Bradshaw and Stabler, Steve Young and Brett Favre, and one behind Peyton and Tom Brady.
That's 4 in the playoffs alone, right?
Correct, sir. These are postseason matchups I'm talking about. Since 1950, this is the most. They're one behind Peyton and Tom, and I think we'll probably see that.
Is that right?
It's correct. Yes, sir.
So Peyton and Tom only played 5 times in the playoffs? I would have thought it was more than that.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow, okay.
So I'll just throw that out to you. And what are your 2 cents on watching these two guys go at it with a three-peat on the line now for Mahomes and Allen having perhaps his best team? Maybe not names, but sum of parts team, Albert.
Yeah, so I would say, it's interesting because it's not like they haven't beat the Chiefs, right? Like they
even
have.
This year.
They're 0-3 in the playoffs. I believe Josh Allen's 4-1 in the regular season against Patrick Mahomes, which a lot of people don't realize. But so they have won. It's just the idea of doing it in this sort of high leverage situation. So, I was in a training room in the back of the stadium late on Sunday night with Sean McDermott. We were talking about about a lot of stuff, as it pertains to this team versus his previous teams, right? And he's been there for 8 years now, and obviously every team's kind of got its own feel and everything. But this year they had to deal with a lot of attrition. So, Micah Hyde's still around, but not in the form he was before. Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, Stephon Diggs, Mitch Morse, all gone. And so there's a lot of transition and a lot of change, and a lot was put on Josh Allen's shoulders as like, okay, like you're the leader now. You got to be more vocal. we're changing kind of the way that, like like the way that you fit into the mosaic of the team, like that's different now. And I think what's resulted from it that's really interesting is, Sean told me there's a real calm about this team. There's a real feeling that even if things don't work out in the moment, they're going to work out in the end. Because they're very focused on the process of getting there and doing the right thing over and over and over again. And it sounds like coaching cliches and all of that, but I do think like that idea of the calm about them, right? Like, could their playoffs have started any worse than it did, against Denver? Like what that looked like, right? They were able to ride that one out. Against the Ravens, like it looked like that was kind of sketchy at the end too. Now they get the drop at the end, so that helps, but they're able to kind of weather the storm with the Ravens as well. He just like he said, like ultimately this team just has a real quiet confidence about it. Like it's going to be able to handle any circumstance that comes its way, no matter what. And I think that's important going into a setting like they're going to go into on Sunday against the Chiefs at Arrowhead, because I think if you get in those moments, right, and three bad things happen in a row, is it creeping into your head now? Here we go again, and there's 15 on the sideline, and there's the big guy in the red parka and the red hat, and oh God, we're screwed. You know what I mean? Or do you have that feeling that it's really going to work itself out? You just got to keep playing. I think the way Sean McDermott looks at his team now, there's more of that than they've ever had before. And I would think that it should serve them well on Sunday. That said, I mean, the Chiefs are coming in here, and I think that, the vision for what they were going to be at the beginning of the season, lo and behold, is starting to come together. They're going to be better at getting the ball downfield than they have been with Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy healthy. The defense is playing well. Chris Jones is rested. Travis Kelce looked, I think, more fresh than he has all year, against the Texans. So it's a steep mountain that the Bills have to climb, even if they do come in there with a better mindset than they've had.
Albert, thanks for the time. Greatly appreciated. In the minute I have left, the question so many of my friends want me to ask you, when is Ryan Day's contract extension? When does that happen? When do we get him extended?
Do you still want him extended? I'm not sure you'd want that anymore.
He deserves it. Don't you think he deserves it, Albert?
He does deserve it. Yeah. I'd say this too. He a lot of people don't want to hear me say this. He's an awesome guy.
Yes.
And I'm happy for him from that standpoint. I would have said that when he was an assistant with the Eagles, with the Niners. Like, there's a reason. If you go back and you watch, like, there's a reason why all those players were so happy for him. Like, I think for a lot of those guys, part of this was delivering it for him, which you don't hear that a lot from players, but I think that's real and genuine. It's mostly because Ryan didn't want it for himself. He wanted it for those guys, So I think I know this sounds corny, but and I don't think Jeff Hafley would mind if I tell this story, but I was on a show maybe a week after the Michigan game, and I stuck up for Ryan in certain ways. And Jeff reached out to me and was like, I'm really glad you did that. And there are so many people around him that feel that way about him. And I know this sounds corny and sappy, and I'm 100% biased because it's Ohio State, but I'm just really happy for Ryan Day because of all he endured and the criticism he had to take, and to have his team play the way that they did after what was an abject it was so bad in that stadium. I was in that stadium on November the 30th. It was so bad in that stadium. I mean, to be able to turn the team around and play 4 games the way they played the last 4 games is really, really incredible. And I'll say this, Rich, you might not believe me when I say it, but it couldn't happen to a better guy.
Albert, you're the best. Take care of yourself, brother. That's
awesome.
Albert Breer
Thanks,
of Prime Video on Amazon for Thursday Night Football and Sports Illustrated. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.